You're probably wondering if this is the best time to be buying a brand new car or even a used car. Let's give you the latest update as to what I see from my perspective. I dug in, look at some statistics, and now we'll talk about, is this in fact the right time? A lot of us talk about after tax season is ultimately when you're going to start seeing the best deals, although we are starting to see some incentives, a lot of incentives on brand new vehicles. Now remember, there's a couple of factors. Incentives. Do they have too many cars on the lot? Too many cars, trucks, SUVs is going to be a bit of a driver. How much incentives end up in your hands? Because a lot of manufacturers don't want to have vehicles on the lot too long. It's called floor plan. They have to pay that, and it's going to cost them to keep the vehicles on the lot. Now, a lot of these manufacturers, the industry average sits around 76 days on the lot. So that, if you're talking about vehicles like Chevy, GM, a lot of those vehicles are a few days, give or take, one way or the other. That is the industry average right now, according to Cox Automotive, the amount of days that a vehicle sits on the lot. Now, ultimately, they'd like it to be somewhere between 30 and 75 days. That puts them about a month to 2.5 months out there. Any more than that, it starts to become too much cost. Now, with that said, on the new car sector, what are we looking at vehicles? Vehicles with low inventory generally mean you're probably not going to get great incentives. However, vehicles like I've seen Range Rover, for example, if that's a brand that floats your boat. Not everybody's looking for that cost entry-level vehicle, but a Range Rover, as an example, is a hard-to-find vehicle. Now, I've received lots of notifications because I personally own a Jaguar. I get the JLR emails for lease options, for incentives, for buybacks and cashbacks, and all these things that they're offering incentives. So as a result, because of all these incentives, finance rates, interest rates, lease rates, all these things are very competitive. Range Rover, Land Rover, you're seeing lower numbers of vehicles available on the lot. And that generally means less likely you're probably going to get good negotiations, although they are giving you decent factory incentives. Toyota, Honda, Lexus are at the bottom of the barrel. They have the least number of days supply because, well, one, they're sought after. People want those products. And two, they're willing to wait. But unfortunately, vehicles like the Prius Prime have always been hard to get. RAV4, of course, with the hybrids have always been hard to get. So any of the hybrid vehicles in the Toyota Lexus lineup have been a significant waiting time. I was down at the Lexus dealer a month ago, and they said basically their lot was full, but it was all vehicles that were coming in off the ship that were going out to customers. You have to wait to get a hybrid vehicle from Toyota and Lexus. That's just the bottom line. And they were doing pay by delivery, so you'd order it and then you'd get it sometime later on. So with vehicles like the Toyota and Lexus, possibly even a little bit in Honda, you're getting a better vehicle, but you have to wait for it. And of course, you're not going to likely get as good a discount. You don't have the bargaining power. The vehicles aren't sitting on the lot very long. So therefore, it's going to be hard to justify pushing the dealer into a corner where they're going to knock off significant discounts. Now, Chevy and GM are about 68 and 79 days respectively. Again, respect to 76 days be the industry average, indicates that vehicles like Chevy and GM are pretty much selling their vehicles as they hope to. They're falling right smack dab in the middle, which means take the incentives if you really need to have one of those highly priced pickup trucks, if you really need to have one, and we know that's a bone of contention because a lot of people just can't afford these vehicles, and quite frankly, I can't either. But if you need to have one of those pickup trucks, you're probably not going to get a strong negotiations, although whatever incentives they're offering up are out there, and it's still worth sitting down to note to try to knock off some prices. You always want to sit down at the table and try to negotiate with these dealers. But other brands like Porsche have rarely been strong about negotiations. You pretty much pay what they ask, move on. They have a slightly larger number of vehicles on the lots or for a slightly longer period of time than the industry average, but they generally sell. Now, Ford's sitting at about 91 days of inventory on a lot, but we know what's going on with Ford. Their ICE vehicles, they led the sales in their F-150 pickup trucks over all other manufacturers. We've seen over 200,000 units last year over GM. GM's better than Ram in terms of overall sales, so I would anticipate internal combustion vehicles by Ford are always a hot seller. And so those ones are going to be harder to get deals on. F-150s, F-250s, harder to find, especially in the 3/4 ton and 1 ton pickup trucks. Very hard to find on the lots. It's the 150s, the Tremors. There's lots of those laying around, and there's a little bit of extra inventory. So you might be worth sitting down and carving out a deal with some of those. But where the longer wait times or the longer durations on the lot actually are coming more on their electrified vehicles. We already know their hybrid vehicles have been selling a little bit better. The sales have been going up, meaning they're harder to sell, but it's their electric vehicles. The Mustang Mach-E, very much a hard vehicle to sell, as well as their F-150 Lightnings, we know are now not worth what their weight in bananas because they're clearly not selling. People don't want them. They've scaled back 50% output in terms of manufacturing and production. So if you really need to have that F-150 Lightning, you might be able to carve out a deal. I mean, right now the prices are still quite high, but you have strong bargaining power. Number one, depreciation's very aggressive, so I wouldn't personally suggest buying a new F-150 Lightning. So I would personally buy probably a year old, get one that's the long range, not the conventional, but the extended range version, Lariat, and get one that's slightly used, and you'll find a phenomenal deal on the used car market. But I would probably not buy a new one. If you need to have one, you're probably going to have a strong bargaining power. But then other vehicles, one of my personal favorites are Mazda. You know, the Mazda 3 with the base 4-cylinder, the 2.5, as well as the turbo 2.5 and the GT are some of the best vehicles you're going to get, bang for your buck. Strong nipping at the heels of a Hondas and Toyotas. The Mazda are both reliable as well as they're fun to drive. They're more stylish. I personally have several friends that own, you know, some of these vehicles by Mazda, not just the cars, but the SUVs. And, you know, they're popular vehicles. They're rising in popularity, but the reliability is there. While they're a little bit thin and they're not necessarily packed full of all kinds of substance, they're affordable and they're reliable. And to a lot of people, that's all that matters. And so the Mazda represents a great deal. And because the volume of vehicles that they have and the days that they sit on the lot are actually quite high, so you might be able to get yourself some great bargains with a brand new Mazda. Because Mazdas are sitting at about 102 days supply on average, significantly up from the industry. Then we find the brands like Mercedes-Benz, Audi, Volkswagen, the VAG group. A lot of those products are in that 90-ish range, which means that they've got a little bit more extra inventory and days that they sit on the lot are a little higher than the industry average. A lot of those vehicles are more premium, but the reputation as well as durability isn't quite where, you know, the Hondas and the Toyotas might be, or even Lexus. So they're going to be generally a little harder to sell. They're generally going to sit around a lot longer. So watch out for incentives on those brands. You're definitely going to want to focus on incentives and don't pay what they're asking for any of those German, European type manufacturers. Now it's interesting, Kia is down around 60 days supply, but Hyundai, its sister brother, is up around 83. Either side of the industry average. It's quite interesting because they sell more or less a similar type of vehicle and from the same brand. And obviously they're both on the same tier. They're not necessarily, one's a premium and one's not, but clearly there might be some incentives, and we're seeing incentives, and I shared this in a video previous about some of the incentives coming out with some of those vehicles, particularly in the hybrid electrified marketplace. A lot of those vehicles are now highly incentivized. You're able to get some good deals in those brands, but you know, take that with a grain of salt. We know there's been some problems with their internal combustion engines. Hyundais and Kias don't necessarily, or haven't traditionally, in my opinion, built some of the most sturdiest drivetrains. So take that with a grain. But if you're looking for a Hyundai, a Kia Palisade, or EV9 or EV6 or some of those vehicles, there might be some options for some strong incentives as refining days supply a little bit longer, particularly on the Hyundai brand. Couple of lonesome losers, Genesis, again part of the Hyundai brand extension, that's their luxury version, is up around 132 days, and 133 days supply you'll find with Lincoln. And Lincoln being part of Ford, I mean, what we're seeing is the quality isn't quite there. We know Ford is a little bit low in terms of inventory because, well, we had the CEO call out Ford as generally in manufacturing on the quality side and said, look, we need to get quality figured out. And they actually held back a bunch of vehicles from make it to the customers. And as a result, the inventory is slightly lower. And incentives are fewer and far between on their internal combustion vehicles, as I already mentioned. But it's the quality that's sort of hampered the availability of some of the products that you're getting from Ford or even possibly Lincoln. Now at the top end of the scale, some vehicles that are double the industry average and some of the worst selling vehicles with mass inventory, and we're seeing this, Jeep, Ram, Chrysler. I mean, all those vehicles, Dodge, they're not selling very well. And you're talking about vehicles up around an average of that cluster of Stellantis at about 152 days supply, about 5 months worth of inventory for those vehicles. You have lots of selection. We're seeing a lot of those Gladiators and a lot of some of the lower end Jeeps, even like the General Wranglers, as well as the Gladiators and the Compass, which is their lower end model. You're starting to find some big deals there. But look for the 2023s. And I would say this stands true for a lot of the brands. I've seen in the GM market, I've actually seen a lot of vehicles. Actually, I showed you a couple weeks back, about some GMs. We're talking about some of their premium vehicles that still have 2022 or 2023 model years. Same thing with the Jeep, Ram, Dodge, Stellantis products. Look for the 23s. You're finding huge incentives. So if you want a brand new vehicle that's a 23, it's already a new vehicle. It's kind of on the way out, but you're going to get some significant discounts on some of those vehicles if you're looking for that. But be sure you do get those discounts. Don't go walk in there willy-nilly and say, hey, here's a 23, that's the color I want, but they don't have it in 24, so I'll buy the 23 and I'll pay just about close to the 24. Don't get snookered into that space, because they'll still continue to play the game. And we know that some of these dealers are looking to maximize their profits, but make sure 23s do offer up some huge incentives. Also, better incentives. Make sure they're possibly throwing in some goods. I'd always be challenging them on that. Paint protection film, no extras. Get the best deal you can on some of these 2023 model years. And that applies for all vehicles. If any of these brands you're looking for have some 23s laying out there, they're brand new old stock, that's where you're going to find some of the best discounts. And as well, the used car market, what we're starting to see is a bit of a decline. Now, people are playing catch up. Of course, vehicles and prices and the availability was going down, but where you're starting to see prices increase a little bit are they in that $10,000 to $20,000 range. Those vehicles are coming up the rear, and they're always going to be competitive, whereas some of the higher priced used vehicles are starting to fall off. People aren't looking as much for the late model, that 1 year old late model version that has 20,000 miles on it. Less people are finding that appealing now, because now the incentives on the new vehicles are starting to press down on that. So now people are saying, look, I can get a brand new version of this vehicle. I'm getting 5% interest charges. I'm getting financing at APR of 4.9, 5.9%. I'm getting some of the big discounts, and they're incentivizing maybe $2,500 cash back, or they're giving me offers on the price of these new vehicles. Now those late model, slightly used vehicles are seeming less like a deal now. And where that was a great thing 2 years ago or about a year ago, that's starting to move aside. Now we're starting to see, those prices starting to hamper and drop down, because nobody's buying those, or less people are buying those slightly used late model vehicles, slightly used vehicles that have traditionally been providing more value. Nobody's buying them. They're getting the new vehicles, or they're going right to that $15,000, $20,000 car. Probably not as much in between. So if you're looking at used, I'd say keep it dirt and cheap and dirty, or possibly just go right to new and look at the incentives. You can sniff around a little bit, but again, those 1 or 2 year old vehicles that aren't incentivized, and you're going to buy them used, and you're probably going to pay a lot more for the interest charges on that. You might balance the numbers. You might be better off just going new altogether. So that's what you're finding in the used car market. And I hope that really helps everybody. Short and quick, what's going on in the new and used marketplace. But ultimately, if you really get down to it, this isn't really the best time. It's better than it was a year ago. Yeah, you're getting better deals now. For sure, we're starting to see, we're not seeing the 20%. We're not seeing the 12%. We're now seeing 8, 9, 10%. So we're seeing better interest rates. We're seeing cashback, discounts. We're seeing more inventory, which means you've got better bargaining power. There's just a better sense of, value add. You're getting better deals today. But this still isn't the best place. I mean, we're never going to get back to 2019. I don't see that ever happening. But I would say, if you can wait, continue to wait, because that's where you're going to get some of your best deals. Don't, throw all your hard-earned dollars down. If you can wait till post-tax season, and maybe even the end of the year. Remember, holiday season's always going to be a hot spot. Wait to the end of the year. Hey, we've come this far. We're already moving on to the second quarter of 2024. If you can get through to the end of the year, that's where you're going to start finding even better deals. And I keep saying this, the end of the year is the best time. The end of the month is a good time. The end of the year is the best time. So if you can continue to drive that old clunker, or you can continue to waiting till kind of that fourth quarter, just before Christmas and New Year's, that's ultimately where you're probably going to find your best discounts. Hopefully also by that time, we're going to see more incentives on, hopefully that, the bank rates are going to start to drop by then. That's the hope. Keep the fingers crossed. If we see lowering bank rates, and we're seeing more incentives, and we're seeing, more push the next year, 25s are coming in, 24s might prove to be some amazing deals at the end of the year. So I always suggest wait to the end of the year, or the end of the month at the very least. So I hope that helps everybody. If you've been shopping for new or used, that gives you a little bit of insight what 24 looks like. And with all of that said right there, the best car deals that you're going to find right now with some of those incentives that we were just speaking of. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.